And this is a big problem because if you're thinking about the density feeders, so we flew those planes across Mississippi, and we know that there's about one feeder for every square kilometer. It's a lot of
Wow.
feeders out there. And so if you think about the number of deer in the state, which is about 1.6 million, they estimate, and you do the back of the napkin math, that comes out to one feeder for every 14 deer in the state.
That is wild.
Well, that's remarkable. That's a lot of feeders.
It's a lot. It's a lot of corn on the landscape.
Welcome to Deer University, the podcast of the Mississippi State University Deer Lab. I'm Jacob Dykes.
And I'm Eric Mitchell, and we're the co-directors of the MSU Deer Lab.
As hunters, deer biologists, and wildlife professors, we're passionate about bridging the gap between research and management.
Each episode, we explore the latest deer research from around the country, breaking it down to discuss how it can improve wildlife and habitat management on your land.
Whether you're a hunter, a land steward, or simply interested in deer biology, Deer University is for you. Welcome back to Deer University. I'm your co-host, Jacob Dykes, and co-director of the MSU Deer Lab, accompanied by fellow co-host and co-director, Eric Mitchell. Eric, what's going on this morning?
It's a typical Monday morning. Lots of fires.
Yeah.
Figuring out
Lots
the
of fires to put out. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. And we're jumping on the podcast early this morning.
earlier than normal.
Yeah, earlier than normal. We keep saying, let's not plan them on Mondays or Fridays, but there's not a good day. We're always talking about this anyways. Might as well just hit record. Huh?
Yep. This is about the only time that we really have available is on Mondays and Fridays.
Yeah. Well, luckily, we have a very exciting one today. One that we've been trying to get going for quite a while, but we're just all so busy. Welcome, Dr. Melanie Boudreau.
Hey, nice to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Just so happens, we're all on computer here, and it looks like we may be far away from each other. We're all just a few doors down from each other. So luckily, we get to catch up with Mel quite a bit, but first time having you on the podcast. So yeah, we're excited about this one and about the topic. I think this is one that's going to resonate with hunters and land managers all over the country, unfortunately, which will make sense here in a minute. But Mel, before we get kicked off too far, do you mind just telling the listeners a little bit about you, where you came from, what motivates you, what you like to do, just all that good stuff?
Yeah. So I'm originally from Canada. I moved to the U.S. 6 years ago, I think now. And I came to the U.S. because I wanted to really throw myself into applied research. And I got to have the opportunity to do that here at Mississippi State. And I'm motivated by creating products for landowners or different stakeholders that really help them with management of wildlife. So it's been a great experience. I love the South. Southern hospitality is a real thing. It's been fantastic. So yeah, I'm really enjoying my time here.
That's awesome. And, we often, we talk to people and we say, yeah, how'd you like your visit down South? What you really came down South, like you came pretty good distance here, even further than O'Hare.
Yeah. And I think I'm here to stay. Just the people here are so great. So it's fantastic.
I love it. Yeah. And I love working with you too. And one thing we need to mention is you've been working with the Deer Lab for a while. Eric and I moved in and taken over the podcast and moved into Dr. Damaris and Dr. Strickland's shoes, but you've been here working for a good while we were gone and doing some really cool stuff. Quick question. I was in Edmonton, Canada for TWS just a couple months ago. So how far is that from where you're from?
All the way across the country.
All the way across.
I'm on the East Coast. Yeah.
So a good ways away. It sounds like I need to get back and see some more of that country up there, but that was a cool place to visit for a few days.
A little colder than here, probably.
It was, but it was welcomed because it hadn't gotten cold here yet. And so while we were up there, it was nice to have some relieving temperatures from the summertime. So yeah, it's great. But great to have you here. You mentioned that you wanted to get here because of the applied nature of the research. And as you know, in the Deer Lab, and, you bring that component to the Deer Lab, that's what we're all about. We do research because we are trying to improve the way that we manage wildlife and habitat. And by we, I mean the landowners, the hunters, the land managers, all that good stuff. We're trying to help people. That's how we do it, is make sure the questions we ask have management implications and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's really impactful work. A little biased, but I think it's important stuff.
Yeah, it's probably not usual to have the data nerd on the podcast, though. I hide in the shadows doing all the number crunching.
Well, I'm glad we finally got you on here. Now everybody knows where the good work's coming from.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Exactly.
yeah, yeah. And well, the topic that we're going to cover today, when we talk about management implications and applied research, this is an ideal topic to support that, right? Unfortunately, this is one of those topics that if you throw a dart at the map, anywhere you hit, probably people dealing with old wild pigs, right? So that's what we're going to be talking a little bit about today. Do you mind kicking off? I mean, telling us, so the reason we got you on here is we want to learn, of course. You're also really cool, but y'all just wrapped up a big project, right?
Yeah, we wrapped this up. I guess it was wrapped up last year, but we just wrapped up everything, like submitted all publications, all that stuff. So this really has been a fantastic project to be a part of. It was my first project with Stephen Bronson and part of the Deer Lab. So I'm really happy with what happened with this project, and the outcomes, I guess, were really informative for the state agency. So it was a great project to be a part of. Some of the pressing questions we had were, now that CWD, is in the state, some of the pressing questions we had were how often are deer interacting with other deer? How often are deer interacting with pigs?
Mm-hmm.
And what do those interactions mean for chronic wasting disease? So that's really where the heart of this project comes from.
Yeah, and that's been of interest to me for a long time. Even just the deer pig interaction stuff. We unfortunately we got a lot of wild pigs. Most states do, and it's pretty tough trying to manage those. So just understanding how they affect one of our native and treasured wildlife, white-tailed deer, is also of interest. But then you throw that CWD component in there, and it's just of course one more reason to dislike them, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And one thing I want to mention before we get too far is if you check us out, so the listeners, if y'all will check us out on YouTube, we're going to be actually going through the research project, talking about the paper. So we're going to have graphs, diagrams, things like that we'll throw up on YouTube. So if you hear us referencing those, we'll make sure to provide a lot of detail, but you can also check those out on YouTube. So don't forget about that as well. Okay, so Mel, would you mind kicking us off with just a little bit of background? For those listeners that we do have that aren't dealing with wild pigs or may not know much about chronic wasting disease and that kind of thing, you had mentioned the questions, but what was kind of the motivation of like, all right, this is something we need to look into?
Well, you know that deer interact with each other, and that's going to spread disease. And we know that, deer interact, but they sort of segregate out. So deer have their little social groups when they're not in the breeding season. And so that sort of mitigates transmission risk. But when we look at, okay, what are pigs doing to those potential interactions? Pigs don't segregate out like deer do on the landscape. They sort of move between social groups. They cover these large areas. They also visit feeders where deer are going to. They might pick up the prion. They might move it around, just like Stephen Bronson had that paper that came out with showing that raccoons were getting the prions on their hands. And so what does that mean for us, in the long term?
Yeah. And that those prions are the disease agent of chronic wasting disease. So they're the actual protein that sick animals are shedding. And we know those go into the environments. These pigs are just picking it up, consuming it or whatever it may be, and just toting it around and dropping it back off. Unfortunately, which, as you could imagine, is a problem from a disease management scenario. And it's my understanding that the pigs, they don't get sick they're not getting chronic wasting disease, right?
Not that we know of yet. They are seemingly, there's a paper that just came out 2025 showing that they do seem to replicate it somewhat in some pigs in some tissues, but they don't get sick from the disease.
Yeah. And then chronic wasting disease is, it affects members of the cervid family. So you got pigs that, like I said, they're just toting it around, making it worse. As you can imagine, wild pigs make a lot of things worse. So, and I keep saying that as if they're a problem. For those that aren't dealing with them, they are a major problem, to the point of like $2.5 billion worth of destruction every year, from golf courses to crop fields to everything else. So they're another species that we actually do, research quite a bit. So this was interesting to bring them together. How are they influencing or interacting with white-tailed deer? And then, of course, from that disease standpoint. So y'all came together. I saw the paper, I saw the co-authors, a bunch of very brilliant minds, I would imagine, sitting around the table solving a lot of our problems and coming up with a way to tackle this topic. So what did that discussion look like? I mean, was it immediate that you were like, all right, well, we got to get some transmitters on animals?
I guess we've Garrett Street here at the MSU here. He's always had this pressing question, and then just an opportunity came up with chronic waste and disease funding that we could sort of buy transmitters to sort of get at the heart of what these interactions might look at. Because there's been a lot of anecdotal talk about, okay, deer are interacting with pigs, and people see that on their trail cameras and at their feeders. I guess researchers like to sort of put some numbers to it, right? And so we've never had that real depth study where we've had collared animals interacting and moving on the landscape at the same time.
It's really interesting that you bring that up, Mel, right? Because in my techniques class, we just covered the scientific method, and the first step of that is observation, right? And when you think about how we do research in general here, it usually starts with an observation. Jacob, you and I have talked about, we try to stay in touch with landowners, right? And a lot of that comes from observations from landowners, from our state agency biologists. So this is just another example of observations being turned into research project.
Yeah, I was actually an hour ago in the wildlife practices class harping on this, talking about what applied research is in the scientific method and observation. And like you just said, yeah, we hear landowners, we work with landowners, we're experiencing it as well. Yeah, this is a problem. Now it's our job to figure out how we can do some research to, again, try to mitigate the issues that we're experiencing. And another part of this, Mel, is looking at interactions, but also unnatural interactions, you might say, with supplemental feeding, different things that we have done that are going to make areas more attractive, that may make these animals overlap on a resource that they maybe normally wouldn't.
Right. And so if we're augmenting those interactions, we're augmenting the risk of transmission, and that's just a huge problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there really is no way to mitigate this disease other than local depopulation at current times.
Yeah. The key to CWD at this point is to make sure that we're managing deer densities where they need to be, and then also not creating these areas of unnatural concentration. Those are a couple of things. And it's, we talk about CWD, it's just another disease. You talk about the same thing with human diseases as well, the flu. You don't want to congregate around others in close proximity. That's going to increase transmission. If there's more people than needs to be, say, standing in a room or something, more likely to increase transmission. So same idea here. But I noticed that an important component of the project was that supplemental feeding and how that attracts wildlife unnaturally, deer and feral pigs, wild pigs specifically. So talking about the study design, can you go into a little more detail on what your thoughts? Again, you're an expert here. Hopefully we can understand what you're going to tell us, but what are some thoughts here on, okay, well, we want to put some GPS transmitters on animals. How do we go about it? How many? How do we go about captures? What are the things to consider when we got hands on animals? Is there other data that you wanted to collect?
So we're really looking just to get those interactions captured by GPS collars. And we wanted to make sure that the animals we were capturing were using the same spaces at the same time. So we wanted all the animals on one property just so we could capture those interactions. And so we were so lucky that we had a landowner willing to work with us. They were just here north of Starkville, and they allowed us to capture. We got enough money for 10 collars for deer and pigs. We were able to collar all those animals on one property, just so we could really get those fine scale interactions that we were looking to measure.
Very cool. And so how did y'all go about catching them?
Technicians going out and doing the usual deer captures. So we would set up, bait station with a camera on it and just leave that for a little while to see the return rate of deer or pigs so that we would know what's happening at a specific site on that property. And then, if the deer are coming, let's put up a deer blind, pop-up blind, and let's see if we can dart that deer and put a collar on it. So
Were those already established bait sites, Mel, or are those new ones that you're putting up on?
those were new ones, yeah.
Yeah.
We were moving around the landscape trying to find those best spots.
Yep. And I think that's one of the things that we hear a lot about this type of work is we're trying to investigate the impact of supplemental feeding, and then we throw bait on the ground to go dart an animal, right? But the key difference is we're moving that bait, then we're done. We're not continuing to put the bait on the landscape, as is the case for a lot of these supplemental feeders and things like that.
That baiting did provide us an opportunity to look at the number of interactions at those bait
Sure.
sites, right? So we're actually answering a different question just by trying to go out and collar animals.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's a great point, both of you. But Eric, yeah, that was one thing I was going to point out too is, for very specific questions, we do bait to attract animals to achieve a goal, but it's very short-lived, and it's for a particular reason, for the greater good, if you will. And that again has to be approved. Very meticulous to get those approvals, that kind of thing. So it is a little bit different than say just somebody feeding, that kind of thing. Mel, so you mentioned the GPS collars. So here's one question I had. You mentioned the GPS collars, and they were taking a location how often?
They were taking a location every 2 hours, but the cool thing about these collars was that they actually had proximity sensors on them. Any collar, so we tested this actually, just by putting collars out in the field and seeing if they could talk to each other. The proximity sensor actually can talk to the other proximity sensor to let it know that it's in proximity, and then you get a record that's saying, okay, these two collars are close to each other. And so whenever those collars are within like about 50 meters from each other, we actually get a signal that they're in proximity.
That's really cool. So as soon as that animal gets close to another animal wearing a collar, boom, you get a notification. That's wild. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool. Was there, did y'all do anything to like, and this may be something later, but how did you quantify like feeder density, or did y'all get some kind of estimate of how many feeders or how common feeders are, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So the third part of this project, other than the GPS collaring and then looking at interactions over those bait sites we were creating, the third part of this project was looking at how dense the feeders might be in the state of Mississippi. So we actually flew a little plane on transects across the state and actually counted those so we could actually get a density estimate.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
flying
pretty
in a little
crazy.
plane was fun the first day. It was not so fun on day 4 or 5.
Yeah, flying the whole state. That is, and then I guess staring directly down, trying to count, feed locations. That is interesting. That's really, really neat.
Neat. Hey Mel, but those back to those proximity locators. So they sent you a message when two deer within 50 meters, about 50 yards of each other. Were you able to actually quantify then, like nose to nose contact, or is it just an approximation of how close they were together?
Just of how close they are together.
It's still pretty remarkable that you can get that much information off of a GPS collar.
Yeah. And we know that will probably vary with different vegetation types, so it's not perfect, but at least it lets
Sure.
us know that those animals are in close proximity.
Sure.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's another thing. And I actually was mentioning this in class too, of just with the advancement of technology, we have so much, so many questions that we can ask, so many things that we can look into that we think we know a little bit about and realize that we don't. With, talking about putting transmitters on animals, know where they're standing to like literally the location with only like a 10-meter error at whatever interval we've got them at, and then knowing when they get close to each other is pretty interesting. And then, of course, you correlate that back to things like location of feeders or environmental conditions or land cover types. Were they in the woods? Were they in the field? Just so many cool things you can do with technology, especially when you put a transmitter on an animal. I love it. Well, Mel, where do you want to take us now? Are we ready to jump into the findings? Do you want is there anything that we missed? Any questions we should have asked about the design and methods? I mean, sounds really, really neat.
Think there's anything else?
I have one more quick question. Were you capturing both males and females, bucks and does, for deer?
For deer, we just did females.
Okay.
Just because we didn't want to have issues if we were going to be collecting the data into the rut. And we really don't have any information on female deer and their interaction movements because you guys have done several buck studies before. So we really wanted to capture some of that stuff that we didn't know about deer.
Sure. And then that makes perfect sense if you only had 10 collars. You're really reducing your sample size 5 and 5. Okay, that makes sense.
And then for pigs, again, trying to get those sows, but we found it really tough to sort of get pigs on this property. Just they don't like to come in the traps. They get trap shy. So it was sort of let your freak fly when it came to that. But we did mostly get females, which I think there was just one male that we had on.
And remind me, what time of year was this?
So we mostly captured in the spring. So we had data from the spring, summer, and then early.
Yeah. And trapping pigs in the spring is difficult in itself. And a lot of people don't realize how smart they are. So if they've had any trapping on that property prior, they learn to stay out of that. You had mentioned earlier that y'all used trail cameras or game cameras, right? I know y'all had those on the bait sites. Did y'all have was there any other use for those? Did y'all grid those out or just take the pictures, analyze those, anything from that? Or was it just they're there, they're not there?
Just on the bait sites, just to capture frequency of animals coming to those bait sites, what animals are coming, things like that.
Okay, cool. And how many total, before we get into the results, how many sites do you think you had?
Boy, this is actually in the results.
Well, we can cover it. Yeah, you just take us where we need to go. I tend to jump around a little bit.
Let's see. We actually captured data over 51 feeding sites. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Man, that's a lot. Yeah,
it's a lot.
And
it is a lot. Here's just a side question. As far as trapping deer or catching deer versus pigs, which one did you prefer?
I think the technicians preferred the deer.
Yeah.
Just easier. The pigs was a longer process. You have to make sure they're coming, then you have to sort of build the trap sequentially so they get used to it, and then capture. Then that actual night of capture is a long night.
Yeah. I've done a lot of both, and I would easily say that deer, yeah, absolutely deer. Also tends to be a little less muddy and dirty and everything else.
Yeah, pigs make that site just terrible.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why why we're trying to manage them so heavily is because they are destructive. But anyways, yeah, I just was curious about that. All right, well, cool.
Real quick before we go into the results, let's do a kind of a quick recap. All right, so we've got 10 collars going out on 10 does, and you've got 10 collars going out, 9 on females, 1 on a male for pigs. You have 51 bait sites that you have cameras on that you're looking to actually quantify interactions amongst deer and between deer and pigs, or just, well, can you walk me through that a little bit more? Both? Okay. And then the proximity locators, we were just trying to get a better understanding of how these species are potentially interacting with each other on the landscape. Okay, cool.
Because we
just so I can get myself back on track.
And we can get proximity from GPS trajectories, but it doesn't actually really tell you if those animals. I mean, it's sort of hard to quantify when you're only getting one location every 2 hours, right? So just having that extra fallback was useful.
So for our listeners, what we're talking about there is you're getting a GPS location every 2 hours on a fixed schedule. But what happens if those animals are interacting outside of that time frame, right? That's where the proximity locators come into play, because now you can understand, okay, it's outside of the 2 hour fixed interval, but they were still within X distance of each other. And we get that information through the proximity locators.
Yep. And that's an important note too, because you're getting a location every 2 hours, which is a lot. That's pretty high frequency. But at the same time, what's going on during that 2 hours, and it's fascinating to think about that. And that's why sometimes we do this research and we've got every 15 minutes. It's a trade-off with battery life. That's what we're fighting against, right? How can we leave these collars on longer and get good data and without, sacrificing battery life? So anyways, it's cool. But yeah, you got to think about what's going on during that 2 hours when you're not monitoring them. We'd like to think they stand still until, but they don't. Well, cool. Well, Mel, do you want to dive off in the results, or what are we thinking?
Sure, we can do that.
And just as a reminder, we're going to be going through some graphs, figures, things like that. We will throw those on YouTube, so please check us out there if you want to follow along. But also, we'll give plenty of detail on here so you can take something away at least. You just won't be able to see the pretty pictures.
I guess we'll start with just a basic. We did get a lot of GPS data. We had GPS data consistently from spring through the fall. I guess landowners are doing their part in northern Mississippi, and unfortunately all of our pigs had been taken off the landscape by October, so that's really the time window that we had information on.
Okay, well, cool. And that's good to know that people are out there managing the wild pig populations, but it can hurt sometimes from a research standpoint, right? But that's good stuff.
We did get all our collar backs.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's
so
great.
Thanks to the landowners for calling us and bringing those things back.
Yeah, and just put a plug in for that. If you ever collect one of our collars on any critter there is, we will thank you. We would just like to have it back. And in fact, there's actually some people that are getting replicas made. So if you'd like to mount it on your harvest, we can just trade you a replica for the real thing, so we can download the data and that kind of thing. So it is not illegal to harvest an animal that's wearing a collar or anything. Sometimes we hope that you won't, but if you do, just give us a call. We'll tell you congratulations and appreciate it. So anyways, that's my plug for that.
So we had a lot of data. And when you look at that GPS data, the deer are doing exactly what we think they're going to do. They're segregating out into their social groups. They're not really interacting with each other. And the pigs are the ones that are moving all between these different social groups. So that was really interesting to see. So the animals are doing what we would expect them to do. And then when you look at those proximity sensors, we actually never had a proximity sensor go off between animals.
Wow.
Interesting. So
That's pretty remarkable.
yeah. So would you say, oh, and this is between deer also? Deer?
Between deer and between pigs, yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's really
you would
interesting.
think your first thought would be like, oh, it wasn't working. But our field tests tell us the collars were working. So it's probably a result of that spatial segregation that's happening.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting in itself.
Yeah. How big of a property were you working on?
Oh, it was quite large, 1,500 acres or something.
And so I just was looking at the paper here. That figure 1 that we'll throw up on YouTube actually shows us where those transects that y'all flew were in the state, and then also shows the locations of the collared deer and pigs. So that's pretty helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see the study area there. Yeah, that's a big place.
Yes, it is.
I guess in kilometers squared, it's 16 kilometers squared or so. So it was quite a big property.
Yeah,
So they had lots of opportunity to move around and do their own thing.
very cool.
So just to double check that, we actually looked at those trajectories, those 2-hour fixes, looking at animal movements, and said, okay, just to make sure that we might not, we might be capturing, or those proximity sensors are actually telling us that they are not interacting a lot of the time. We looked at how often do those trajectories actually come together, and it was less than 1% of the time. So we're pretty confident that that low interaction rate is actually happening.
Yeah.
That is it's interesting. It also throws support a lot to some of the CWD management that's ongoing, right? When you talk about concentrated removal efforts and you're trying to remove an entire family group versus amongst the family groups, makes a lot of sense, right? If you have one positive doe, it's probably interacting most with its family group and not outside of its family.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. That just supports that idea of the decisions that are being made. There's a method to the madness. It's not just random, right? And then also you throw keeping deer densities where they need to be. You're just allowing those animals to move as freely as they would, and not have too many running around making those unnatural interactions and stuff.
Okay, so the next thing we looked at was sort of like habitat selection tendencies. And we know that pigs like bottomland hardwoods, they like water. And so our results were telling us that they were having those same tendencies, and then that the deer were like in the upland forest. Just to show that if we had these landscapes with diversity, that you could sort of mitigate those things, because those animals don't really like the same spaces, other than they will go for, that hard mass together. Those kinds of things.
Yeah, so especially, there are going to be times a year when Mother Nature just produces these nutritional pulses, right? That'll draw those in. So, like you said, a big acorn crop or something like that. So you started to see them use the same areas during those times.
We didn't really have the data for the fall, but just to
moving
show
into
that.
the fall.
Just to show that there are these different selection preferences for different land cover types between the two species. So they're not exactly going to like the same sorts of things.
So they might not, if you have pigs come onto your property, it's not necessarily that they're going to push all the deer off your property. They're just going to start using different areas and different resources.
Yeah. But where these animals, visit regularly is those bait sites that we were talking about. So those are the sort of the problem areas where our collared animals were coming back to.
So unnaturally being drawn to interact where they wouldn't normally. Yeah.
And then when you talk about, we didn't collar every animal on that site. And so when you're looking at, what is the frequency of returns for different other social groups that we didn't capture? We have animals coming on those trail cameras that were not collared. They're parts of different other social groups. What's the frequency of return on those? And so you can see that those animals do come back. We have lots of social groups that interact at those bait sites, and we have lots of pigs that come there. So deer and pigs are using those sites regularly.
Yeah, that's just a little bit different than what I would expect it as far as the deer pig interactions. So they kind of keep I wonder if there is use of the same resources, but just like a temporal separation with that as well. Did y'all look at anything like that?
We did. Of all the camera pictures that we had 13,000 pictures or something. 5,500 of those were deer and pig events. We never had a picture out of all the pictures where a deer was on camera with a pig.
Really?
we have these beautiful sequences where a deer is like running off and then a pig will come on camera, but those two animals were never in that same space together.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Well, I'll tell you what, as a deer hunter, that right there would be enough for me to say, okay, well, any pig that comes on the property, we need to have some kind of management strategy there if they're running my deer off.
So we did look at intensity of use throughout a 24-hour period, and you know how animals have these circadian rhythms. Deer and pigs are both crepuscular. They mostly are active during dawn and dusk, and they do use those bait sites during their most active periods. So they're not really shifting their activity patterns to different times of day, for example. They're also using those bait sites, both of them. So we didn't have a lot of bait sites that were only deer, for example, or only pigs. They were both a mixture of the two. And
Okay.
it's funny, I remember stories of my technicians saying, I was all set up for a deer and then pigs came through and messed up my deer thing I had going on. So very frustrating at times.
Well, it's interesting too when you look at this figure. You have those two peaks like you talked about at dusk and dawn, but then you also have sexual segregation going on where you don't have a whole lot of bucks and does feeding or visiting those sites at the same time. It seems like there's some separation there as well.
Just little variations in their activity patterns, I would say.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Did y'all have any feed sites that tend to be dominated by bucks?
We did not. I think there was only 3 sites on the property that only had deer on camera. And, very few that only had pigs on camera. So there really was that intermixture happening.
That's funny because one of the things that we oftentimes emphasize with supplemental feed and bait sites is we have this artificial congregation of deer, right? And I think a lot of times fail to actually mention that you have a lot of different species hitting these bait sites, right? So now you don't only have an artificial congregation of one species, it's multiple species. And we have these diseases that can move across species, that can become an issue.
Yeah, and then also, even if it isn't going to affect another species, we know now that this is picking it up and carrying it somewhere else, right? So it's, maybe going to introduce it to other areas where other deer may pick it up and then will be affected by it. So that's something that I really hadn't thought much about, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I neither.
Yeah.
So
One
the
more reason to
kicker,
dislike them.
so the kicker is there is this lag effect. So deer show up and then a pig shows up and then the deer says, I'm not going to return until I make sure that pig's not around. And so that lag effect, that return rate is lessened because a pig is around. So this is average of 2 days. So if a pig shows up on your camera, there's an average lag of 2 days before you'll see a deer again. But it could be up to 25 days, especially for bucks.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot more than I expected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I mean, that's a
And-
pretty big take home message just in and of itself right there. Potentially up to about 3 weeks. You have a pig show up. Might not get another picture of a buck up to 3 weeks. That's crazy.
Yeah.
For does, it's about 11. The longest could be about 11 days.
Interesting. Yeah. Got to get them out of there.
Yep.
And so you had mentioned, didn't y'all did you have a video of
We
pigs and
do.
deer?
We have, so like I was saying, our technicians were getting frustrated because pigs were kind of messing up their deer sets and stuff. So we actually do have a video of pigs showing up into a food plot, and the pigs are actually pushing the deer out of that field. So it was great. I guess we knew that this was happening, but to actually capture it on video was fascinating.
Well, this makes me think back to, one project I worked on where we were darting deer and we actually weren't putting collars on. We were collecting some other data. But anyways, we would go sit, and if pigs came out, that was it. We'd go home because we had learned throughout the capture season that once pigs showed up, we weren't going to see deer. And so just to save time, we'd kind of shut it down that evening. So to hear you talk about how long it takes for the deer to show back up and that they were actually running deer out of a food plot, that kind of thing. Yeah, I could see that. I believe it.
Okay, so one more thing to talk about, I guess, in relation to bait sites was that we actually also calculated that a deer are 5 times more likely to interact with feed sites in general than with other animals around them, I guess. So if we were to calculate that out, deer are 5 times more likely to come to a bait site than to go elsewhere. And so that's big implications for CWD transmission when you're talking about
Absolutely.
interaction rates.
Yeah. Yep. And parasites and whatever other things that are out there as well. So when we say unnaturally congregating animals, but there you go. I mean, it's happening, isn't it?
And this is a big problem because if you're thinking about the density feeders, so we flew those planes across Mississippi, and we know that there's about one feeder for every square kilometer. It's a lot of
Wow.
feeders out there. And so if you think about the number of deer in the state, which is about 1.6 million, they estimate, and you do the back of the napkin math, that comes out to one feeder for every 14 deer in the state.
That is wild.
Well, that's remarkable. That's a lot of feeders.
It's a lot. It's a lot of corn on the landscape.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
That's impressive.
It's important too to start thinking about when you're talking about interaction rates. You mentioned a paper that Dr. Damaris, Dr. Strickland published with one of their students, Miranda Wong, and they quantified contact rates at feeders versus food plots versus like an oak flat where they're eating some acorns. And they found, if I've got this pulled up right here, contact rates were different at feeders. They're about 2.1 deer to deer contacts per week. So they're actually using cameras to quantify interactions, actual contacts amongst those deer. So 2.1 per week for feeders compared to 0.1 at food plots. So drastically less. And then if you compare that to oak trees, you're looking at essentially zero contacts when they're browsing on hard mass. So you start to put all this into context, right? You've got a feeder per 14 deer on the landscape, and you have drastically increased contact rates amongst deer at feeders and bait piles compared to food plots and other areas, right? This all, you start painting this picture, and it's a big deal. It's important.
Yeah. Well, and I think you often hear too, people say that feeding is no different than food plots. I've always disagreed with that for several reasons, but I mean, you just some of the data supports that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Still a lot to learn about all of this, right? And how prions are deposited in the landscape and what that looks like. But I mean, if you just look at this from contact rates, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. And again, I always try to bring it back to, think about it from a human disease, from the flu or from strep throat or from from anything else, it's disease management 101. What does make this much different is that prion. It's a protein. It's not something that at this point we can treat. It's not living. You can't kill it. And it's 100% fatal. So yeah, I know people are tired of hearing about it. We're tired of talking about it, but luckily we got people like Mel doing really cool research that's going to help with this.
Yeah.
Well, and I think sorry, Mel, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just wanted to say some of the next steps we're looking at is like looking at, mapping this out. So what is the worst case scenario as this disease crosses the state? Where do we have to put boots on the ground to sort of mitigate this so that we have a healthy deer population that people can harvest and not be worried about, so.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about. And Eric and I are working up in Benton County with a couple of landowners and stuff. And they tell us, we're not seeing deer anymore. We don't have any deer, and we're seeing that in other states as well. So those mitigation strategies, they work. They've been shown to work. But yeah, it's good that we're continuing to try to figure out more about this, what we can do. And Eric, remind me, at this point, the estimate, it says moving across Mississippi at about 3.5 miles per year.
Something like that, 2.5, 3.5, somewhere in there.
So, that's kind of scary to think about. Maybe not for tomorrow, but for 10 years, something like that. So,
well, that's one of the things that makes this disease so difficult to discuss, right? Because it's not here today and it's super visible. It's something that's you can see right away. It's a very slow acting disease. So it's going to take time. It takes time for prevalence to increase. It takes time for it to spread. And sometimes that's hard for us to wrap our brains around, right? Managing something for 10 years down the road. But that's exactly what this disease is.
Yeah. And I'll tell you one thing I'm taking away from this as well is there's a lot of things we can't do in the realm of CWD. There are a couple of things that we can do, and I'm all about doing what we can. You know what I mean? And one of those sounds like we need to continue to have our foot on the gas with getting rid of pigs or managing wild pigs, right? Now that we know that they're running around depositing prions as well. So, well, Mel, what else we got?
I think that's all I have on that project. It was a really cool project that sort of gave us insights, even though it was just a small one. We just had never sort of quantified those things before, and so it really gave us an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, no, I think it was really cool and really important. Again, when we talk about doing applied research, this is the kind of stuff we're talking about. So what are the takeaways here? If you were talking to a landowner, they said, hey, we listened to the podcast. What would you, now that you know this information, what would you do differently on your property?
I know everyone wants to feed. We all want to get that deer feeder out. But even just mitigating that, the time that feeder's out there or that bait's out there can really help, mitigate some of these interactions. Making sure there's a diversity of that habitat, good habitat for deer, can really help sort of manage that from a landscape perspective.
Yeah, I think at this point, aside from the fact that we like to attract animals to stand in front of us so that we can draw a bow or pull a trigger or something like that, I get that completely. But I think at this point, we've seen the baiting, like corn feeders, that kind of thing. It does far more harm than it does good, right? And that's what we're not talking about nutritional supplementation. We're talking about baiting so an animal comes and stands in front of us. And it does make hunting exciting, I would imagine. But yeah, at this point, and there's so many negatives from putting corn in a feeder. And if you think about the rate at which we're doing it, I'm still kind of blown away by the numbers across the state.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I'm a deer hunter. I also love to see deer standing in front of me. But yeah, I just think about what does that mean for a healthy deer population down the road? And what can I do to sort of mitigate the impacts that I might be causing to that population?
Very well put.
Yes.
And on top of that, what does that mean for my grandkids and my grandkids and all that kind of stuff? So if I had it my way, they'd never, ever, ever have to talk about CWD, because I tell you what, I'm sick of it. But yeah, no, Mel, that was perfectly put. That's exactly how I feel about it as well.
So before we sign off, do you guys have anything else you want to talk about?
No, I mean, you tell us what we're talking about.
Okay, before we sign off, I do have to give a shout out to Gray Allen, a nice guy that I met from Alabama. He says that he has listened to every single podcast coming out of Deer University. He's implemented a bunch of the management recommendations from this podcast, and that his property is thriving. He sees all kinds of critters out there. And so I just want to give a shout out to him. Gray, you're doing great stuff out there. So thanks for the enthusiasm.
Shout out to Gray. That's awesome. Glad to hear it. And Gray, reach out. Let us know if there's anything you'd like for us to cover. I mean, anybody, reach out. Let us know if there's anything we can cover. Or if you just want to tell us how it's worked out for you, we love to hear that. Again, the whole reason we do this is working with landowners, and we're landowners and we're land managers and we're hunters. We are those people too. And so that's what we want to do is make sure we're putting out content that's benefiting those people.
And we do get emails from time to time with suggestions for topics. So don't be afraid to shoot us an email if you've got an idea, and if we can get to it, we absolutely will.
Yeah. We are all over social media. The YouTube, I'm hoping you are going to check out, because we're going to throw those graphs and stuff on. But email us, message us on Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is. We're actually really responsive. It may take a couple of days, but we'll get to you. We get emails and calls constantly. Our information is out there and readily available. So we love to chat. So Mel, last question for you. Where would you like to take this? You mentioned earlier that y'all are actually going to flesh out a few more things, but what's kind of the next step with this project? Or is there another project that you're excited about that you're about to jump on?
So we are actually doing what the next steps, I guess I talked about. We're actually going to see how this plays out. So we're going to put those interactions into a risk model for CWD as it crosses the state. And we're just doing that for the state agency to see where they could do their work better. So that's in the works, but I guess I'm always into deer management problems.
Us too.
So looking forward to just continuing with the Deer Lab and helping you guys with whatever you need.
Cool. So I wanted you to throw that out there so now our listeners know that you're going to be back soon talking about these things. So yeah. We'll hold you to it. But anyways, thank you so much for jumping on. I know you're busy. Thank you so much for working with us. I mean, we're dear friends too, and we, like I said, right down the hall from each other. But it's good to catch up on the podcast.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, all right. I think we're going to sign off. Yeah, it's been fun. Appreciate it. Y'all have a good one.
We thank the Patrick F. Taylor Foundation and the St. John and Dudley Hutchinson family for their endowed financial support. We would not be able to do this without it. We're also grateful to our employers, the Mississippi State University Extension Service, and the Forest and Wildlife Research Center.
If you have questions or ideas, check out MSUDeerLab.com and hit the Deer University tab. Thanks for listening.